In the early 1990s, a haunting voice emerged from Ireland that was a stark contrast to what was popular at the time. I'm of course talking about the Cranberries. The group's introspective debut, Everybody Else Is Doing It, So Why Can't We, all the way to the politically charged anthem of Zombie on their follow-up record, No Need to Argue, represented one of the most remarkable evolutionary leaps of the decade. Led by Dolores O'Riordan's uniquely mesmerizing vocals, the band transformed from crafting intimate tales of young love and heartbreak to delivering powerful statements about war and social justice. In today's video, let's explore the early years of the Cranberries. Born in 1971, the Cranberries frontwoman Dolores O'Riordan was brought up in a strict Catholic household. She lived just outside of the city of Limerick in a 2-bedroom cottage in the countryside in an area called Ballybricken. Despite growing up around a lot of family, darkness was present in frontwoman Dolores O'Riordan's childhood. She revealed years later that she'd suffered trauma at the hands of an older man and witnessed her sister accidentally burning down her family's home at the age of 7. She told Rolling Stone in 1995, "I have a lot of secrets about my childhood. It was at the age of 7, she got gum stuck in her hair, forcing her mom to cut her hair short, something she repeated later on with the Cranberries." She grew up the youngest of 7 children. 2 others had actually died shortly after birth in a household where her mother supported the family after her father became unable to work following a motorcycle accident. This happened 3 years before Dolores was even born. At the age of 5, her nursery headmistress stood Dolores up on the piano and asked her to sing to the class. This continued well into her teenage years, and after learning the piano, Dolores wrote her first song at age 12 called Calling. She became known as the girl in school who wrote songs. She even played organ and sang at christenings in addition to weddings. She remarked in one interview that her family barred her from joining any bands until she was 18. Her brothers even beat up one of her boyfriends when she was a teenager. She was dating a punk rocker at the time. By the time she turned 18, she started to slowly turn her attention towards joining a group. One group even told her she had a great voice and that she should join their band, but she quickly discovered they only did cover tunes and she wanted to perform original songs. O'Riordan, by this point in her life, didn't really look to traditional rock bands or pop music like a lot of musicians do, instead admitting, "Other bands have never influenced me. The only other bands I've seen live were cover bands at weddings and stuff. I've always loved religious music." It was later on in her life she got into groups like the Smiths, Duran Duran, Depeche Mode, as well as The Cure. In 1990, O'Riordan heard from a friend that a local band from Limerick named the Cranberry Sauce, say that as fast as you can, was looking to replace their newly departed singer Niall Quinn. The band had formed 1 year prior and even recorded a demo tape with Quinn. Meanwhile, O'Riordan and the remaining members of the Cranberry Sauce seemed like a match made in heaven. O'Riordan, after all, wrote her own songs she could sing, while the Cranberry Sauce wanted a female singer to front their new shimmering, dreamy sound. The band was made up of brothers Noel and Mike Hogan on guitar and bass, in addition to drummer Fergal Lawler. Lawler and Mike Hogan had played together first, and then Noel picked up the guitar just as a hobby. They originally had a male singer named Niall Quinn that the members simply referred to in the press as, and I quote, "the other guy." They even remarked that by this point in their history, there were 2 problems with their group. The singer wrote bad songs and the members couldn't really play. How's it going to rain? How's it going to rain? The band became familiar with Dolores, according to Noel Hogan, who told the Boston Globe, "I didn't know anything about Dolores until a guy that we knew. His girlfriend's sister is in Dolores' class. She told us about her." Dolores, by this time, according to Noel, had been writing for years at home, while the rest of the band were pretty new to songwriting, but they had a bunch of instrumental tracks written. So O'Riordan lugged her keyboard across Limerick at the age of 18 to audition for Cranberry Sauce. She showed up to the audition wearing a pink tracksuit. Noel recalled to Rolling Stone, "Dolores came and sang a few songs that she had written. We were blown away that this small girl from Limerick had such an amazing voice. The fact that she wasn't already in a band was a miracle." O'Riordan described her recollection of the audition to the Morning Call newspaper, stating, "The songs they had at the time were not my taste, but I saw the potential in the playing. It was easy for me because I knew no matter what their first impression was, that the minute I opened my mouth, they were going to be impressed. This was the first time that she had ever played in a band setting. Cranberries saw us as influences were pretty wide-ranging, with Noel telling the Anchorage Daily News, "If Mike had his way, we'd be a heavy metal band. Fergal is into everything, and Dolores only knows what she's heard on the radio." Adding, "She sang a lot of traditional music, which I can't stand." Noel, meanwhile, counted himself a big fan of the Beatles, The Cure, and the Smiths. He even later credited the band's success with the fact that the members had such diverse musical tastes and backgrounds. O'Riordan left that audition with an instrumental track that consisted of 4 looping chords. She returned a week later with both the lyrics and melody for the song that clinched the audition. But Noel was quick to point out to the Boston Globe, "Our equipment was so bad, you couldn't hear the words." That song that O'Riordan had returned with was a song called Linger, which later became one of the Cranberries' biggest hits. The band by this point did have stand-in lyrics for Linger, but Dolores didn't really like them, calling them silly, admitting, "I told them that if I was joining, then naturally I'm going to write my own lyrics. I would never ever sing somebody else's lyrics. I'm kind of strong-headed that way." Linger was written about O'Riordan's 17-year-old ex-boyfriend, who was also her first kiss. He was deployed as a soldier to the war-ravaged country of Lebanon. He was writing lovesick letters to her during his deployment.
It's tearing me apart. It's ruining every day.
Despite Linger becoming a huge hit for the band, at the time they wrote it, they didn't really think much was going to come of it. They continued to write more songs, with Dolores and Noel forming a songwriting partnership, and within 3 weeks of the band solidifying their lineup, they had enough songs to record a demo. Since stardom was the furthest thing from their mind, the members had to support themselves with day jobs. Noel was working at a hotel, Dolores was working at a clothing store, Mike was an apprentice plumber, while Fergal was training to become a machinist. But when the band played their demo for their friends, they were pretty impressed and encouraged the band to send it out to labels and radio stations. The band was also helped out by a local musician named Pierce Gilmore, who owned a local studio named Limerick, which allowed the Cranberries to record their first demo tape, which was a 4-track EP named Water Circle.
It was over and you couldn't see.
It was an employee at the recording studio who provided Noel with the addresses of record labels. Noel soon quit his job and started sending out the group's demos to both labels and radio stations. When one of the demo tapes was sent back to the group, it was addressed to the Cranberries, and thus the band's name was changed. The record labels ended up biting at the tape, with the reps even traveling to Limerick, driving around town to look for the band. One of the first labels interested was Rough Trade, followed by Virgin and EMI, as well as Island. The band played a showcase at a local university, resulting in reps from those labels flying in from London to watch the performance. The band eventually nabbed a deal with Island Records, which fellow Irish band U2 was signed to at the time. O'Riordan told the LA Times, "We had been together 6 months and had just 6 songs to our name, and 32 record company people flew in to see us. We were afraid for our lives. I'd never heard the term record company until I was 18. Then after we signed with Island in 1991, we got very hyped by the British press for 6 months. Noel added, "We were treated like the next big thing, but our songs weren't very good, and we were pretty bad live." The band remarked how they would all stand very still on stage, with Dolores sometimes playing with her back to the audience. The British press even referred to Dolores as, and I quote, "the girl who stands sideways." O'Riordan was deeply distrustful of the British press, admitting, "With the British press, if you're not a bimbo from London, you're just not in. If you're not prepared to talk about your mammary glands, forget it. They look for sensationalism. One minute they're hyping a band, the next minute they're stabbing them in the back." Their first release for Island Records was an EP titled Uncertain.
You're so uncertain in love.
By early 92, the Cranberries once again entered Zurich Studios with Pierce Gilmore to record their first full-length record for Island. The initial sessions, though, proved to be unsuccessful and led to Gilmore being fired from the project. The band even admitted to the Orlando Sentinel that they almost broke up during this time, and the tension also resulted in them firing their manager. Why did they fire their manager? Well, they claimed that he was being manipulative and he was feeding different information to each of the members, so they got together and decided they had enough and canned him. In an interesting twist, they turned to Jeff Travis of Rough Trade Records, who had tried to sign the band previously. They wanted him to be their manager, which he became. They hit it off with him when they had negotiated their label deal previously and still liked him. As for the producer, he was replaced with Morrissey producer Stephen Street, and it finally resulted in the band releasing their major label debut in 1993, Everybody Else Is Doing It, So Why Can't We? The album's name came from a term that O'Riordan had come up with. Noel Hogan remarked to the Arizona Republic, "It's something that Dolores said when she was watching a band one night. There's a lot of bands around, but there's not a lot of good bands." The band's debut record arrived on March 1st of 1993, 4 months later than the original release date. The hype machine behind the Cranberries had long died down by this point, and in the UK there was a collective yawn as radio programmers ignored the album, at least initially. America was a different story. Their label Island really pushed to make inroads in the States, targeting college and alternative rock stations who embraced the songs Linger and Dreams. Many independent and small record stores gave out the single Dreams for free as a bag stuffer with 3 other songs from their debut album. The same was done at the Cranberries' own concerts, and the label sent thousands of postcards to addresses that were gleaned from magazine subscriptions and the label's own internal database. As for the possibility of food tie-ins, Island wanted nothing to do with that. They didn't want to be kitschy with the Cranberries.
We're lying all the time. Was it just a game to you? But I mean, it's changing every day.
MTV was another factor in the Cranberries' success, as both programs 120 Minutes and Alternative Nation prominently featured the band. The album's first single, Dreams, gained instant traction on college and alternative rock stations. And within 3 months of being released, the song showed up on the Modern Rock Tracks chart.
Oh, my dreams, it's never quite as it seems.
Dreams peaked at number 42 on the Hot 100 and 15 on the Alternative Airplay chart. O'Riordan recalled the song's meaning, stating, "I wrote that about my first love when I was living in Ireland. It's about feeling really in love for the first time."
The person falling here is me.
The success of the Cranberries seemed like an anomaly given that Rage and Anger were really popular on the rock charts at the time. Noel Hogan told the New York Daily News, "I think people like the fact that our music doesn't sound like anybody else. Bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam are fine, but I would never write something like that." O'Riordan, meanwhile, recalled the success of Linger, stating, "I remember when MTV put Linger in heavy rotation. Every time I walk into a diner or hotel lobby, I was like, Jesus, man, here I am again. It was trippy."
And now I'm such a fool for you. You got me.
The song peaked at number 8 on the Hot 100 chart and number 4 on the Alternative Airplay chart. Meanwhile, it was a top 10 hit in Canada, Iceland, Ireland, and the Netherlands.
Do you have to let it linger? Do you have to? Do you have to?
The album, for its part, ended up peaking at number 18 and went 5 times platinum in the States. The Cranberries, more specifically Dolores, was frequently drawing comparisons to the Sundays and Sinead O'Connor, and it probably didn't help that the Cranberries even had a song on their debut album called Sunday.
Here's where the story ends. Nothing can take away this blue.
O'Riordan, though, didn't seem to hate the comparisons, and the Catholic Church played a big role in both O'Riordan and O'Connor's life, despite both women feeling differently about the Catholic faith. But the album wasn't initially a success in Europe, more specifically Ireland and the UK. O'Riordan told the New York paper how, unless you're from Dublin, the Irish press acted like you didn't exist. She added how she was slagged off by one Irish critic for sounding, as she put it, too Irish, adding, "In Dublin there's an incestuous scene and they're all singing like Americans. The Irishness is appreciated more abroad than it's appreciated in Ireland." But then finally, 1 year after its release and the reissue of singles Dreams and Linger, and the fact that the album became a huge hit in America, it finally went to number 1 in the UK and on the Irish charts. Drummer Fergal Lawler told the Sacramento Bee, "We went backwards. After we came back from the States, the news had been that it had been so popular that it filtered back home and people gave it a second chance. We were lucky because most bands don't get that second chance." The Cranberries were so grateful for what America had done for their career that during a show in London, O'Riordan draped herself in the American flag, telling Pulse magazine, "I think I owe my confidence to America and what Americans did for my band," with her adding to the LA Times, "It's very difficult to break in Europe unless you break in England, and it's very difficult to break in England if you're Irish."
You have to let it linger. Oh, and here is me, a different way to be.
The group's debut album sold upwards of 6 million copies worldwide. The tour to support their first album also influenced how the Cranberries wrote going forward. For their follow-up album titled No Need to Argue, the band decided to go in a heavier direction, using distortion and increasing the volume. Fergal Lawler stated that the change happened because, and I quote, "We had been used to hearing ourselves loud on stage and everything, so maybe that's a natural thing that happened then." Following their first album, the band was met with the label of being, and I quote, "a nice band," something that they weren't actually happy with. Noel Hogan remarked, "We used to be nice to everybody and do what people wanted us to do, but then we had a manager that really messed us about, and then you realize that you have to piss people off." The band even teased in 1993 that their follow-up record would be less nice, with O'Riordan adding, "But it's not like Iron Maiden or anything like that, you know." The Cranberries were now considered the largest musical export from Ireland since U2. The Cranberries avoided the sophomore jinx as their follow-up, No Need to Argue, was a bigger hit than their first record. Released on October 3rd, 1994, it sold 1 million copies in just its first 3 weeks of release, peaking at number 6 on the Billboard album chart. The short break between albums resulted in the band writing their second album mostly during sound checks. By the time No Need to Argue was issued, their first album had already sold 3 million copies worldwide. One of those songs that O'Riordan brought into the sessions was titled In Your Head, which was famously later renamed Zombie. It became the Cranberries' biggest song of their career, and it represented the group's heavy foray into politics. Noel told Forbes his initial thoughts about hearing the demo. "It was a change in direction sound-wise, obviously a lot harder than anything we've done. Dolores brought it in and she was playing it on the acoustic. We started doing what we'd normally do and made it that kind of sweet indie pop thing. It was one of the times where she said, 'Look, that's not really going to work with this. It's a kind of I'm pissed off song. I'm angry about this, and I think the music should reflect this.' When we did Zombie, we realized you can actually be heavy and still have melody." Released as a single from their new album in September of '94, Zombie was an anti-war song that took aim at both the religious and nationalistic violence in Northern Ireland, also known as the Troubles. By this point in time, the violence in Northern Ireland was relentless and occurring almost on a weekly basis. By the time the song had been written, almost 3,500 people had died and tens of thousands were injured. One incident in particular inspired the creation of Zombie. March 20th, 1993, explosives hidden under a garbage can in the city of Warrington in northwestern England took the lives of a 3-year-old named Tim Perry and a 12-year-old Jonathan Ball and injured dozens of others. What made the news hit even harder was the fact that these kids were just out shopping for Mother's Day cards. The bombing was carried out by the Irish Republican Army, or the IRA, a militant group whose objective was to remove British troops from Ireland. The Cranberries were on tour in the UK when the incident happened. Dolores heard the news, and it was something that would stick with her. She recalled, "I remember at the time there were a lot of bombs going off in London and the troubles were pretty bad. These bombs going off in random places, it could have been anyone, you know. So I suppose that's why I was saying, it's not me. Even though I'm Irish, it wasn't me."
It's not me, it's not my family.
She knew the pain that the families were going through. She had, after all, lost 2 of her own siblings at birth. The events hit even harder when the Cranberries were on tour and passed by the site of the bombing, and it was gut-wrenching for O'Riordan. She added, "I drew from a lot of different life experiences: births, deaths, war, pain, depression, anger, sadness. I'm also obsessed with mortality. I have bipolar disorder, so I struggle with mood swings. I go from one extreme to the next. But I think that was irrelevant when writing Zombie because the event was so massive at the time, it was all over the papers." Zombie was written during a rare break between tours in the comfort of O'Riordan's own home in Limerick. She recalled, "I picked up the electric guitar, then I kicked in the distortion on the chorus, and I said to Ferg, maybe you could beat the drums pretty hard. Even though it was written on acoustic, it became a bit of a rocker. That was the most aggressive song we'd written." Zombie was recorded in Dublin with producer Stephen Street, who worked on the band's first album, and he spent a long time trying to get the guitar settings right to give it a suitably expansive sound. While the band were experimenting with raising their volume and adding more distortion, O'Riordan remarked that she wasn't trying to make a concerted effort to ride the grunge bandwagon, adding, "It came organically because we were using our live instruments. We were plugging in a lot, and we start to mess around with feedback and distortion. When you're on tour, you start to mess around a bit more with the live side of things. There were a lot of bands that were part of the grunge thing, and this wasn't grunge. But the timing was good." She went on to add that to her, a lot of the grunge bands were very similar to one another, and she also had no idea that Zombie was going to be a huge hit later on. Given its subject matter, Zombie became identified as an anti-IRA anthem, and as its popularity spread and it soared globally, the singer was asked in interviews to share her views on the situation in Northern Ireland. She told New Musical Express, "A lot of people need to grow up. It's pathetic." Not everyone, however, was impressed with her lyrics, as one Northern Ireland band named Stum told Melody Maker, "She's from Limerick, what the would she know? You're talking about the last 25 years of a much bigger and wider problem that has gone on for hundreds of years." It was also the band's own label who had concerns with the lyrics of the song. The Cranberries' former manager Alan Kovac revealed to Rolling Stone that Island Records urged the Cranberries not to release the politically urgent song as a single. The label offered O'Riordan $1 million to work on a different song, but she ripped up the check. He added, she felt the need to expand beyond "I love you, you love me," and write about what was happening in Ireland at the time. Lawler recalled arguing with the record label and how, even before the album was released, the band was playing Zombie in concert as far back as 1993, adding how the audiences hadn't heard it before, but they really reacted to the song, which was a sign that it was a catchy track. Zombie was issued as a single, and it hit #1 on the rock charts in several countries, including France, Germany, Iceland, and it was certified platinum in Germany and Australia. It also peaked at #1 in the US on the alternative airplay chart and number 32 on the mainstream rock tracks chart. No Need to Argue wound up selling about 20 million copies, largely based on the strength of Zombie. But equally important to the album's success was the accompanying music video, in which Dolores is painted gold and surrounded by silver-painted cherubs, which provides a contrast to the streets of Belfast in the video. The shots you see of soldiers and children in the video was actually taken by director Samuel Baer, who traveled to Northern Ireland to make the video. He had most famously, up until this point, directed the video for Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit and Blind Melon's No Rain. Dolores recalled, "I actually thought the director was very brave. When he got back, he was pretty pumped. There was a lot of adrenaline pumping through him. He was telling me how tense it was and how he was blown away by the whole thing." Well, MTV seemed to agree because the band beat both Michael Jackson and TLC to win Best Song at the MTV VMAs. But that paled in comparison to when the band was invited to perform at the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony in 1998 in Norway, when John Hume and David Trimble were honored for their efforts to find a peaceful solution to the conflict in Northern Ireland. While Zombie dealt with politics, other songs on the band's second album saw the band looking more inwards. The record featured the single Ode to My Family, which charted in many European countries, in addition to Canada, Australia, and the States. It peaked at number 11 on the US alternative airplay chart. While Ridiculous Thoughts peaked at number 14 on the alternative airplay chart, and even featured a young Elijah Wood in the music video. Despite all the band's success, they also received some backlash from critics who claimed that No Need to Argue was a slower, deeper, and more atmospheric album, with critics calling it too self-indulgent. While Noel told the Boston Globe, "In my opinion, it's a good album. I'm not ashamed of it. We could have played it really safe and tried to do what we did on the first album all over again, but we didn't. Dolores also looked back at the group's career up until this point, proudly proclaiming that she didn't use her sexuality to get herself to where she is today, while also taking a swipe at artists like Mariah Carey and Janet Jackson, referring to them as, and I quote, marketing projects. At the same time, the intense media attention resulted in Dolores being separated from her bandmates, with her being the center of attention of the band. Even a 1995 cover story the band did for Rolling Stone featured only her on the front cover, but her bandmates didn't seem to mind. Fergal Lawler told the St. Petersburg Times, "It's something that annoys her, but we don't worry about it. We prefer being out of the limelight. I don't want people to recognize me on the streets." There were also rumors that the Cranberries were supposedly going to break up because Dolores had solo ambitions, but they proved to be untrue at the time. The Cranberries continued to release albums until 2003, when the band took a hiatus. They returned in 2009. Sadly, on the 15th of January 2018, O'Riordan was found unresponsive in the bathroom of her London hotel room and was pronounced dead. Her cause of death was the result of accidental drowning in a bath following sedation by alcohol intoxication. Only a few weeks after she passed, the rock group Bad Wolves released a cover of Zombie, and that cover topped the US Billboard Mainstream Rock Tracks chart for 3 weeks and peaked at number 54 on the Hot 100. O'Riordan had heard the Bad Wolves version prior to her death and was actually scheduled to collaborate with the band hours before she passed away. Following O'Riordan's death, one of the fathers of the Warrington bombing victims, Colin Perry, whose 12-year-old son Tim was killed in the blast, came out and praised the Cranberries' former singer for writing Zombie. He admitted that he didn't initially know the song was inspired by his son and didn't find out until Dolores' death. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in Rock Culture Stories. Take care.